I'm Frederick Gerton, and I'm the filmmaker.
And I'm Leilani Farha, and I'm the advocate.
Leilani, welcome back to Pushback Talks.
We're back.
You know, we are back. We are back, and you've been busy as always. I've also been busy. You know, I was in Croatia and showing the film where the Push shows in 10 theaters. It's really cool. And 10 cities, I mean. So it starts to happen things. But I know you've been a lot engaged in, I mean, you all the time talk to governments and people around the world. And I know you've been involved in the beautiful nation of Puerto Rico in the Caribbean.
I have been, just a little bit. Attended an amazing conference and got to meet some amazing people to talk about, believe it or not, in a tiny place like Puerto Rico, financialization of housing.
We have a guest. So we should maybe bring in our guest right on. It's Ariadna Michelle Godreau Aubert. It's like French singing names, but it's the slave history, it's the colonial history that gave you those names. But welcome to Pushback Talks, Ariadna.
Frederick, Leilani, thank you for having me here. Grateful, simply grateful.
So Puerto Rico is your 3.2 million people. You're kind of connected to the United States, but you don't get the good part of it. It seems like you get the bad part of it in some way. Can you explain this strange relation you have to this big nation?
Yeah, briefly, Puerto Rico is a colony. Puerto Rico has been under colonial rules for more than 530 years, first under Spain and since 1898 under the U.S. Puerto Rico as a colony lacks self-determination. The official status says that we are an unincorporated territory, that we belong, but that we are not part of the United States.
What does that mean exactly? Like, do you vote the way all Americans on the mainland vote?
In real terms, Puerto Rico was a war bounty, a war prize that the United States won after the Spanish War in 1898. Since then, Puerto Rico has gone through several impositions of culture and political structures. Like we had a militarized government for the first decade of the 1900s. Then we got a second-class citizenship, which means that Puerto Ricans are citizens of the United States, but they can't vote for the president, and they don't have a voting power in the Congress. So most are, although we are bound by politics and we are bound by an economic structure, Puerto Rico's decision power, it's very limited.
It sounds like a very strange setup and running over years and years and years and years and years. Wow. So, but it's good to know. And you're a founder and you're an executive director of Ayuda Legal Puerto Rico, which means legal assistance, I guess.
Yeah, it means legal aid.
Legal aid, yeah, right.
Yeah. And we have been doing legal empowerment work for 7 years now. So we are the only legal housing advocacy organization in Puerto Rico. We have been working with evictions, foreclosures, and more often with disaster survivors, not only through legal aid, but also through changing and shaping the systemic structures that choose who gets to live under a roof and who doesn't.
Yeah. Leilani, remember the Hurricane Maria was in September 2017, and we were actually out filming for Push. We were in New York City, in the UN, and we were also outside the Blackstone office, and we were trying to, you were about to have this meeting with Blackstone that got canceled, but then you, in the midst of this, you were also active in your role as a UN Special Rapporteur, commenting on the relief or the lack of relief for the hurricane victims in Puerto Rico. So you've been on this for a while, and I remember you being very upset.
Yeah, it was, obviously the extent of damage done by Maria, the hurricane, was just, historic. I think one of the worst natural disasters that the U.S. itself has seen. And that was just apparent to all of us, everyone, right away, even though I think the government reports were underreporting deaths and sort of not minimizing the whole thing, but certainly minimizing the cost of the cost to lives of the hurricane. And some rapporteurs, we all agreed that what was happening, the lack of flow of resources, and I think Puerto Rico's in a very particular position where I think they can't receive aid from non-U.S. ships. And like there was all this stuff that was preventing aid flowing to Puerto Rico, and it particularly by the federal government. And we decided to write a communication. It may not have been the best communication in retrospect when now that I know a little bit more about Puerto Rico. But anyway, you do your best when you're working quickly with a group of people. So we did do that. I don't know if it had any impact. Maybe Ariadna can tell us.
But you were in the midst of this, Ariadna. The hurricane struck, and you were thousands of lives got lost, and hundreds of thousands of people lost their homes.
Yeah, Puerto Rico was very fragile back then. We have been under an austerity and debt crisis for 10 years now when Hurricane Maria hits Puerto Rico. So we had an unsustainable debt, $73 billion, and we have laws like the cabotage laws, which basically say that you can only use U.S. ships, which are way more expensive. And that meant that when Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico, solidarity from Venezuela, from nations in the Caribbean, from other places, basically got rotten in the ports because they could not bring it to the shore and to the people that were desperately needing water, that were desperately needing food, medicines. And that is the context where we receive proofs of solidarity. And I remember that specific letter by UN special rapporteurs, and it meant having a link to the outside because we felt pretty disconnected, because Puerto Rico is a colony. It's a colony that is not acknowledged as a colony. It's not part of the lists of official colonies in the UN. It has an invisibility across the board. And having that proof of solidarity, there's a lot to discuss, but it was important because it meant that people were seeing what was happening in Puerto Rico.
Leilani, I mean, your letter meant something. And I think it's good to know that it's to be seen and to be heard is important. Even if it doesn't really help you materially at the moment, but it gives you some strength to fight on.
Yeah, I have heard that from other groups where, as you say, Ariadna, there's the feeling of isolation and aloneness in your struggle, and the international community recognizing what's happening can be incredibly supportive and important to help you carry on. But I'm interested to know, were you directly affected by the hurricane, you and your family? And what I mean, we see the images, we know there was total devastation, but maybe you can talk about, how many homes, how many families, what about informal settlements? I'm assuming they were negatively affected with the least sound structures.
Yeah, in our case, I was back then living in the co-op with such a social interest housing where I was born and I was raised. And I was pregnant with Lucas. And we remember total devastation, but we were living in a concrete building, that was safe. For a lot of people, that meant not only losing their houses, but losing their land, because the devastation of Maria, it has to do with sea level rise. And we had a lot of, I would say that land simply disappeared of specific places. We lost nearly 780,000 houses, which meant total devastation for people in Puerto Rico. That many of them had concrete houses, but others were living in risk zones. Just to give you a number, 24% of the people in Puerto Rico live in what is considered medium to medium high risk zones. And that means places where floods happen or landslides happens. And that has to do with climate change. We say the natural disaster of Hurricane Maria, but climate change was also on top of everything else. We knew that this could happen. Like Puerto Rico is in the middle of the Caribbean. We knew that hurricanes come and go through our route, and nothing was planning like to address the housing crisis and the climate crisis. And then Maria happened, and we had to look.
Wow. And it's, to our listeners, Puerto Rico has around 3.2 million inhabitants, and then imagine if more than 700,000 people lose their homes. So it means that everybody in Puerto Rico knows somebody who lost their home. I mean, it's like it's the scale of the national crisis is humongous, and it's like it's over the top. And I didn't know that scale, to be honest. I knew it was a lot. And I also remember that, I mean, one of the few things that came out, which is like, it's always this kind of, the media is so focused on conflict, was the brave mayor of San Juan, who was then a woman, Carmen Yulín Cruz. She spoke out against the President Trump, and in a very nice way. A strong woman who fought an ignorant president. In the end, what I understand, Trump used the aid to build the wall to Mexico instead of using the money in Puerto Rico. It's kind of shameful, or it's extremely shameful.
Yeah, it's extremely shameful. Like politics to Puerto Rico are always like based on a very racist structure, and it's something that it's on the cases decided by the Supreme Court when they spoke about a different culture in Puerto Rico in a very bad way. But it's also present on the way that politics are made, you know. And when the hurricane hit Puerto Rico, we remember having that discussion, and do we really have to go through a discussion about building a wall, like to kill people who look like us, who talk like us, who are like us, or like asking for aid? And that idea that survivors were expecting charity, that survivors were expecting like a favor, was horribly focused. Like when that president came to Puerto Rico and he threw a paper towel roll to the general public, and that image of, you know, just being happy about how happy was Puerto Rico. It was a perfect picture of where we were at in this like broader disaster capitalism like framework.
Yeah. And Leilani, this brings me, you have a co-Canadian
Yes.
writer, Naomi Klein,
Yes.
who's been writing The Shock Doctrine, but she's also been looking into Puerto Rico. And it's obviously, I mean, and Naomi Klein's theory is that you use natural disasters, political disasters, to kind of change the facts on the ground. And so I guess you can see that already, that the shock doctrine is working on in Puerto Rico, the flood of money coming in, taking over people's land and homes.
Definitely. Like I would tell you, like, just to give you and you mentioned Blackstone and TPG, which are like the equity partners. Like they came to Puerto Rico right after the hurricane, and they came to Ayuda Legal Puerto Rico's office, and they were like, what can we do about the foreclosures? And maybe you should stop doing them. That could be like an option. But they were trying like to save face, we would say, like after the disaster. Naomi Klein came to Puerto Rico, and it also became like a way to start like moving a discussion on who are the people benefiting from the disaster. And a couple of things happened. 2016, 1 year before Maria, the US under Obama imposed a fiscal control board, a board of 7 unelected people who were making decisions about finances. Finances have to do with public policy. There's no way around it. So they started doing this. And then right after Hurricane Maria, these same members like went to different places in the US, and they started talking, saying that Puerto Rico was a drunkard that has just like hit rock bottom with the process of the hurricanes. Like phrases like, this is a moment to invest. This is a great opportunity. Puerto Rico has been power washed, were some of the phrases phrases that were used by that narrative, like using the disaster to say that there has been a replacement of population. There are a lot of vacant houses, or at least vacant spaces, that now we can use to rebuild something better. And the government, instead of counting the deaf people or of acknowledging a death toll, was very interested in making these summits for foreign investors to come to Puerto Rico and speculate over the land. And that was the disaster response that we got.
How do you see that, Leilani?
One of the things that I found so powerful about Naomi Klein's work is, for me, it's the emotion. Well, I always like the emotions in something because that's what drives humans to act, good and bad. But it's the shock part of her shock doctrine that's so important. The idea that you have a nation in shock because of, in the case of Puerto Rico, a natural disaster or climate-related disaster, and that global capital will use the shock of the nation to their advantage and gain huge profits, a foothold on land, etc., off the backs of other people's misery. And I mean, it actually played itself out in the global financial crisis in the U.S. on the mainland as well, using the shock of a global financial crisis to benefit Blackstone in particular. So I just find that it's so sinister. It makes me very emotional because you have people I mean, you described for us just briefly, but I could feel that experience of post-hurricane. And I visited New Orleans after Katrina, and talked to many people experiencing that post-disaster emotional life. And to think that there are people out there praying, and governments, even worse, governments enabling this, allowing this to flourish, setting up bodies like that body you talked about. For me, it's just it's heart-wrenching.
So Ariadna, there is obviously like an invasion of investors coming into Puerto Rico now. So who are they and what are they looking for? Can you see what is in their mindset? What are they looking for?
Yeah, so I totally agree with what Leilani was just saying. It's like they were waiting for the perfect opportunity. So we had in 2012, that would be 5 years before Hurricane Maria, the governor then started approving laws to incentivize investments. These laws, Law 20, Law 22, started like depicting Puerto Rico as a tax haven. And the actual idea of the ads were, come to Puerto Rico, invest here. And Puerto Rican women were depicted as people like bringing them cocktails in the beach, with this idea of a visitors economy scheme. That helped like people like millionaires, like cryptocurrency, we're talking about a cryptopia, and everybody else like started like coming to Puerto Rico. Airbnb, you name it, we have them here. Like Richard Prouty, like it's the same people over and over again. And we started like matching the names of hedge funders and investors that were coming in, and people who were buying actual huge chunks of land, of vacant buildings who were already devastated, but that people didn't have the capital to fix them. So that happened, and at the same time, like we had another influx of people who were looking at Puerto Rico as a place to do real estate, to start selling, to start accumulating properties, trying to build more hotels. And something happened, because nothing is accidental, that Hurricane Maria served as a perfect scenario, talking about shock doctrine, to start like pointing to people with informal titles, pointing to people with informal structures as, you are the issue, you need to move, where you're living is dangerous, but at the same time, it's a perfect site to build this, like Hilton, like, or a reserve hotel that would be amazing in that same place. So those tensions like really like skyrocketed after Maria.
The laws that you talked about, Act 20 and 22, let me make sure I understand. So it's the government of the U.S., like the mainland, that passes that, or the governor in Puerto Rico? Where do those laws come from?
These are local laws.
Local.
This is Puerto Rico.
Right.
This is Puerto Rico
And
laws. Yeah.
they basically make it that you don't pay any federal tax on capital gains, and corporate tax is very, very low, as I understood it, like 4% versus 20% if you were under U.S. laws or something, like a huge, huge benefit to bring in these investors.
It's so huge that for new residents of Puerto Rico that come through these laws, they can receive even 100% of exemption on their wins, on their capital gains. So it's and the contribution that they have to make, it's minimum. It's like creating 4 jobs. And these are low quality jobs. So there's no accountability about it. So we have those 2 laws, and also we got a federal law that was imposed by Trump's administration that states opportunity zones, which are places where you can invest and you can have all of these incentives like adding up. And in the case of Puerto Rico, 98% of the island is an opportunity zone. So it's like basically like cleaning the board so that you can have investors like play with how would the island look like. And disaster capitalism and disaster recovery has played like a very important role in how would that cleaning that slate for them would look like.
Ariadna, what you're describing now is like it is like a horror movie, and it's like it's in some way it's a very depressing story about this. All this money that flows, it's like quite often tax evasive money, it's criminal money, and it's all floods towards where they can grow their money even more. So, but then we have the sun, the light, and that's you and your people. You're actually fighting back. So tell us more about your work. What is your strategy? How do you fight back these monsters?
Frederick, and people are pushing back and people are fighting back. After Maria, people were waiting for the government to do something, to answer, to respond. After the earthquakes in 2020, we saw a shift. People were not waiting anymore. People came out. People went to the streets. People started distributing water, distributing resources. Nobody was expecting for the government to show up. People like took the supply warehouses where food was being hidden away from communities. In 2019, people went out to the streets and they took out a governor. Now we know the names of the investors. We know that these are the same people behind the hedge funders. We have lost 12% of the population in the last 10 years, people that has left the island because it's easier to relocate to Orlando, Florida, than to move from one municipality to the other because of austerity. But now we know because everybody has lost somebody and people are pushing back. And I think that the piece about legal empowerment and about adopting human rights narratives, human rights practices that start by saying, I am entitled to, I own, I cannot be dispossessed from my house, from my community, are like the main narrative right now in communities and in organizations in Puerto Rico. At Ayuda Legal Puerto Rico, we have been talking about the right to housing constantly, not only against expropriations or informal settlements, which is like a big part of our history, but also about evictions and foreclosures, because we have normalized that people owe in Puerto Rico. That's the public debt narrative. You owe, you failed. It wasn't the government, it wasn't the corrupt people, you owe. And they started like embodying us like people who failed with this like racial stereotypes of the people who depend on welfare, who are like bad, like paying back. And now, because we speak about the right to housing, we know that we don't owe. When people can afford a rent, can afford a home, they don't owe. We are entitled to safe housing. We are entitled to security of tenure. We are entitled to a dignity that cannot be decided at a court, that cannot be decided by a financial institution. And that is accompanied by legal support, by legal empowerment, by knowing your rights, is a change of narrative. And it's huge. It's huge.
I know for Leilani, she's smiling because this is her language. This is like her mission.
That's not why I'm smiling, but keep going, Frederick.
No, I mean it's really cool. I mean, because we've been. I mean, you've seen my film, but you've also all our podcasts. So we're talking to citizens who are affected in more or less in the same way, and put under stress because of this extreme flow of money into our homes. But how I'm interested to see how. So you're shifting the narrative. Do you think you can also shift the politics?
And we have. Like when disaster assistance was needed in Puerto Rico in the aftermath of Maria, there was a huge discourse on legal interpretations based on the fact that people with informal titles, half of the population, could not have a right to disaster assistance. And instead of criminalizing those people, of joining those who said, those were people who were in informal settlements, they don't deserve, blah, blah, blah. People decided to back them up, even people without a formal title, and fighting for the people for informal title to be acknowledged, to be able to get assistance, to not diminish the efforts 4 years after the disasters and continue backing up the people with informal titles, not to get them to go for formal titles, but to get them to be acknowledged as owners, as people entitled. That was a change of policy, and that has required years. But it has also shown the government that we are not in this game over and over again when we get hit and then we get to be okay, and then we get hit and then we owe somebody to be fine and to be joyful. So yes, we have changed politics and we are coming for more. We want more.
I love that. I exactly like that. We want more. This is not enough, because you've been under this for centuries, and it's obviously it has to change. It's kind of clear. Leilani.
Well, the reason I was smiling was actually because while it is my language and I obviously am very wedded to human rights frameworks, one of the things that we always say about the human rights framework is that it shifts the narrative away from a charity-based model to one where people have entitlement and are rights holders and they're claiming the rights. And I can't think of a better example than what's happening in Puerto Rico, where that is exactly what you're doing on the ground, is shifting that narrative away from, as you put it more eloquently than I can, but debtors to rights holders. And I think that's going to be huge as you push for more. I can count on one hand the number of places where non-papered title to land has been recognized. Very few places. I can think of a community in Mexico. There's some of this is happening in India, but it's very rare to get that kind of political win where you're being understood as having title to land without, a piece of paper documenting it. That I think is huge, and I think it's a great base to keep going for more. So what's next? That's what I want to know.
I was in a talk when Push was showed at a conference in Belgium, and I was in a panel afterwards. And there was actually somebody working with Puerto Rico and the land trust, and so you tell us more about this land trust, because it seems to be a model that it's kind of inspirational.
Yeah, basically the community land trust that you're mentioning, the Caño Martín Peña, is an initiative to try to face investors and also speculation over a land that was of a very low-income community, but also a community with a long story of resistance. And they decided for collective ownership as a way to maintain the social tissue, for not to be displaced on an individual basis. I think that that this community land trust, if anything, it shows the way that collective power can help shape the identity of a community. So people all over the world, when we're talking to housing people or people working with land justice, they know who El Caño is. And taking back that identity, instead of being a slum or being deemed a blight by the US or the local government, has been a shift of narrative that actually became policies, and that became a structure, and that became a fight that other communities in Puerto Rico and elsewhere look after.
I mean, all over the world, we know that people who live in so-called slums, they don't have the legal papers of their homes normally. So that's why it is easier to just kick them out. But then also in Puerto Rico, you also have a lot of foreclosures of people where people actually own their homes as a part of the financial crisis that also, hit part of the US and Spain and many other countries. So a lot of people are sitting with who can't pay their mortgages, I guess.
Frederick, we have homes that are underwater 2 times, homes that are underwater because they're undervalued, but also that they have been extremely damaged by the hurricanes. And yet the financial institutions, they follow the people to get their money back. And, when you get foreclosed, there's a feeling of solitude. People don't open the letters. People don't want to answer the phone. There's a lot of people actually being sued in federal courts in the US because the second market bought the mortgages and they sue people on the federal court. A lot of Puerto Ricans do not speak English. And we have a long history of federal prosecution of people in Puerto Rico. And when people get a letter in English that says that the federal court is summoning you, the fear that they have, am I going to jail? Am I going to lose my kids? These are the questions. And when you try to shift that from shame to grace, or you try to shift that from feeling alone to understanding that this is part of a broader crisis and that it's not fair, that it's inequitable, people realize that. We have cases that we have won because people have self-defended themselves. And we have this particular case of a woman that she came to one of our workshops after talking to us via one of the helplines. And she said, I came here because you talked to me for the first time that I have a right to housing. And I have had my stuff in the trunk of my car for a month, waiting for the bank to come in and foreclose my house and take me out of my kids. And she said, but you told me that I had a right. And then I just want to sit here and to experiment what does that feels like. And I talk to you about this and I get goosebumps. I've been doing this job for 12 years, legal popular education work. And every time you talk to people about rights, they know. And it doesn't need to be in a paper. It doesn't need to be in a constitution. It doesn't need to be in an international document to be ratified. It's something that we have. And everything else comes after. And because we know that, because people know that, financial institutions know that we are coming after them to demand accountability, to demand reparations too, and to demand that this is not a business. You are not renting a house in the beach for some investors. This is about somebody's roof. And if you decided to go into this business, then we have to speak about other terms. And that has to do with a lot of accountability on the table.
This business. Thank you, Ariadna. You give me goosebumps also when you're speaking, and it's cool, and we need to hear your story. It's inspirational for people because people are struggling in many countries around the world against the same kind of guys. You can see this. You talked about this already in Push, Leilani, when the Blackstone guy was sitting at University in Miami talking about. How could you get all these 50,000 homes? Yeah, maybe the financial crisis was useful. You could grab 50,000 homes. But this is what you see. You buy mortgages and then you resell them to somebody else. It's here in my country we have, like the Hells Angels or Bandidos. They're also buying people's debts, and then they knock on doors, So it's a business to buy debts. And then the more brutal you are, the more you can win. And it's a very low point in human history when you can sit at the office somewhere in New York and buy people's homes and then send them legal letters in a different country. It's brutal.
It is brutal. Although I love how Ariadna has captured the power of human rights. We always say that people know their human rights viscerally in their gut. They know when they have been denied dignity, self-respect, the things that are required for human survival. And I think you just captured that in such a lovely way. I wanted to ask you, I recall you have a manifesto with several points. What's happening with it? What do you hope to do with it? Where's it going? How's it going?
So people do like have a visceral knowledge of their rights, and I think that we need to talk a little bit more about violations and not like stories of war, but violations that are, need a remedy, that are entitled to remedies, and that has a lot to do with the right to housing. You know, coming from a very low income, like impoverished family myself, I remember that talking about hunger, talking about what you don't have in the fridge, talking about not being able like to afford the light or the electricity or the power or water. These are things of shame. We don't speak about them publicly. So the idea of bringing those conversations to the table, and I always start workshops with talking about the fridge, talking about what you brought to school to eat, what were you able to afford your family, to start breaking that feeling of shame. The manifest basically takes like 5 points about accountability, about who's responsible, about the fact that crises do not affect all people equally, but they affect women, but they affect Black communities in particular, and we put them in a manifest that basically is a yes. And Frederick, you were saying something that we need to resist, and resistance is usually a no. No, I don't want this. I don't want to be displaced. I don't want to be foreclosed. But resistance needs to be grounded on hope, on a yes. I am entitled to. I have a right to. And this manifest is basically an action plan that is in 5 very simple premises. The idea is to have organizations in Puerto Rico and from other places to endorse it. And right now we are calling for very, very small like discussion groups to speak about how does an action plan looks like starting there. And the result has been amazing. Like to have people speak about, you know, the housing justice fight is not only yours or your communities, but it's an international fight. What's happening here, it's happening in Detroit, in California, in Toronto, in Sweden, it's happening everywhere. And that idea, and that is something that Ayuda Legal Puerto Rico, I try to ground on this work of being accompanied. We never say represent, we accompany people, and we are accompanied by people. And that's where the manifest is going. While that's happening, we're pushing for a very specific bill, which is basically grounding this effort, which says at times of disasters, the New Hurricane season starts in 20 days. You don't get to foreclose or evict no one. And when we presented the bill and when we got multi-partisan support, the banks started going crazy, saying that we are good, saying that they are the victims. They actually said that, saying that it's very inequitable because like debtors have us and they have no one, saying that they do a social labor, and saying that they self-regulate themselves. We don't need a law because we do that on our own terms. And having that pushback from them also tells us that it's the correct way to go.
Exactly.
Amazing.
Exactly.
Amazing.
You're an inspiration, Ariadna, and your people. We will put up a link to your websites on the blurbs of this episode, so you can go in and find out more about the work that Ayuda Legal Puerto Rico is doing, the legal aid of Puerto Rico. Do you have any information in English out there?
I think there's few, but I can send
No
you a couple
importa
of links.
tanto. There is always a Google translation.
Yes.
Va super bien. We're actually going to wrap up because,
It's time.
It's time. But it's, Ariadna, un placer.
Thank you, Leilani.
Fantástico.
Gracias.
Ahora quiero venir a
Gracias.
Puerto Rico para conocer más.
Claro.
Y además tenemos
Claro
que mostrar a Push en San Juan.
Yes,
Por
definitely.
favor, let's do that.
We're going to show Push in San Juan, and I mean,
It would be amazing.
That'll be amazing.
we will make it happen. We have translations also in Spanish, of course. It's been shown in a lot of countries around Latin America. Leilani, we're wrapping up.
We're wrapping up. I'm so inspired. I've from the minute I met Ariadna till now, I have felt incredible hope for Puerto Rico, but also more broadly. I see sometimes, I sit in my office and I think, right to housing, does it resonate? Is it the framework that I think it is? Can it really do what I think it can do? And I think the work in Puerto Rico is showing how important it really is. I feel really good. I can go on with my day.
Also doing this podcast, Leilani, is like we've been with amazing people in Athens, in Beirut, in Zagreb, in Berlin, in Barcelona. There's a lot of people doing very strong pushback work right now, and to see and we can all learn from each other. That's also the point we're doing this podcast, that we can get inspiration for Puerto Rico to be used in Toronto or other. I mean, the land trust idea is also happening in other countries, but your example is like a very strong one. So this is cool. Mm-hmm. Leilani, now you have to tell us how we fund this show.
Well, we don't fund the show, but we're trying to. We need Patreons. You can become a Patreon and support us with, I don't know, $5 a month, $2 a month, a coffee for Frederick.
Coffees are expensive in Sweden, yeah.
Yeah, but good. Oh, so good.
They're really good, that's true. And you can also support us by telling your friends about the podcast, to invite more to listen, and to promote the podcast through your own social media, because that's, we don't have money for ads on Facebook, on Twitter. If you have mighty enemies, you need many friends. And as we now know, we have listeners in 110 countries. It's kind of a lot of friends. So, and if every listener brings in another one or two or three or four or five more, we will grow stronger. So that's the Pushback Talks for today. And muchas gracias, Ariadna.
Thank you. Thank you all. Gracias, Leilani. Gracias, Frederick.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Wonderful
you.
to have you here.
Leilani, thank you. And
thanks, Frederick.
Walk the dog. See you. Bye.
Bye.
To watch Push, visit pushthefilm.com. You can also support us by becoming a Patreon at patreon.com/pushbacktalks. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you again next week.